Humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasakaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnani. I'm going to continue on Mahan's Kundalini meditation method. And the last few satsangs, I spoke about the technique, the uniqueness of the technique, and some of the general benefits of this meditation. Today, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth. But in this in depth, often we hear most people talking about meditation, specifically Kundalini meditation. And one of the things that, most people, it's a subjective experience. One would have that experience of blissful feeling, universal feeling, everything that I spoke about, right? And I was very curious in this early part of my life when I was starting to practice, is that I had this notion that I can feel something, but I don't know what it is. I can feel a change. I can feel the body warmth, a little bit more attention, a little bit more focus. I feel a little bit more joyful some days. And so all the things that is documented in Mahan's I Got book, a little bit of everything was starting to manifest after, a couple of months of practicing. And I wondered, am I experiencing something real, or is it something what we call placebo effect, So I started continuing this journey. I said, I don't know the answer to this, but let's pursue this because it is helping me in many things. And that was the time that I was in university. I happened to be in doing a lot of research for my work. And I had access to library, I had access to many things. And I said, okay, let's see whether what we are practicing, does it really make sense? And oftentimes, Mahan has documented many things he's experienced. I was getting glimpses of those experiences, but that's not enough to confirm what I'm experiencing is really real. So this journey of really trying to look at spirituality from a scientific perspective and science from a spiritual perspective. So this whole notion, I remember Swamiji when I was very young, learning to practice, Swamiji said, you go and study science and you'll understand what my meditation and the philosophy is. So that is resonating in my mind. And very rarely that you get a Mahan or a saint or a sage tells you that go and learn science. They often say, well, everything is here and this is what you need to do. But this Mahan is very, very different. Even in his book, he says very clearly that you have to do research and introspect and contemplate and reflect. So that was kind of a lesson that I got from Mahan, that meditation alone is not enough. One needs to actually dive deeper to really understand what is happening. So I was very fortunate that the conditions were really good for me. I was in the university. I was doing a lot of physics and quantum mechanics and many things that I was able to start thinking about how do I put Swamiji's teachings to test, Swamiji's meditation to test. And over the many years, some things were clearer, some things were not clear. But as I progressed in my academic and research, I had access to better library facilities. I had access to laboratories. I had access to the top scientists who were working on the brain, was working on meditation and so on. And this is a fantastic recipe. And I think it's a blessing of the Guru that told me that go and practice this meditation, but use a scientific lens. And I strongly believe that words of him, that grace of him actually enabled this, opening this opportunity for me to explore. And a lot of the things that, oftentimes you hear, oh, meditation feels good, this very mystic, is kind of shrouded with mysticism. This Mahan actually was showing very clearly in the language that he knew. He tried to put it in a very scientific language. And there are, parts of his book that actually had, he exposes the brains. He exposes many things in the limited scientific training that he had, but yet it was very profound that he was able to make major breakthroughs. And that's probably why he told me, look, go deeper and you'll know what the secrets are. And that is the journey that I took. And I was not just going to sit down and meditate. Being the scientist in me, I was curious. Was this really happening? What is happening? Why is it happening? Can I explain these happenings? Right? And putting a lot of questions and searching for those answers. And that over the more than 40, 45 years has led me to better understand Mahan's meditation method, better understand his philosophy, better understanding of the world we live in, and most important, understanding the creator, the creative processes, and the creation, including ourselves. And this is the sharing that I want to have, that don't just take meditation for the sake of meditation in a ritualistic way. Use an introspective mindset, reflect, go deeper, do some research work, transform your body, your mind, your intellect into a laboratory for exploration. So, so Mahan used to say that the scientists have telescope and microscope, but Mahan's teachings teaches us another important mode of exploration, which is the inner scope. How do we use a technique or method to go within ourselves? And this is what the 3 stages of meditation is, that inner scope, the journey that helps us to go within us and explore that self. By the way, a lot of these discussions on the self-realization, the soul, has been talked about in all the great, scriptures, not just Hindu scriptures, but in Buddhist scriptures, in Christian scriptures, and many, many scriptures. It has also been talked about by non-religious scholars and philosophers on what consciousness is, like Carl Jung, and a number of them that actually spoke about what consciousness is, and so on. So Descartes and a whole range of things. So I was exposed to Swamiji's teaching first, but then all the other scriptures, the Hindu scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, the Sikh scriptures, and I started exploring them, and I saw very similar discussions on that Kundalini or life force. And the same thing was spoken by the other secular scholars, which was the philosophers and so on. So it was very exciting for me that everything was coming to a convergence. And that's probably why Mahan said, go and do research and explore. You will see the teachings that I'm giving is everywhere. So taking that journey, I want to go a little bit more deeper on that, practicing that meditation and the micro level changes that I experience. And I started exploring why these changes are happening. What were the changes? How did Mahan's meditation nudge those changes, of helped me achieve those changes, and the structural changes that took place in the brain, in the body, in the mind, the intellect, and giving a good understanding of the creator, the creation, the creative processes, the creations, and also ultimately ourselves. So this is the journey I want to take you through today on what are some of the benefits of Mahan's teachings. And I spoke about this on Mahan's meditation method, the 3 stages of the initiation process, the practice. The first stage helps us to give that focused mind and the intellectual growth, and I spoke about why that happens. There's a whole science behind this. Why is it that we become more creative, more smarter? Because there's a structural change that happens in the brain, the prefrontal cortex and so on. So I spoke about it. So there's a science behind this first stage initiation. You can refer back to the earlier YouTube. Same thing for the second stage, how it improves the health, the body, and the overall well-being, because when the energy is brought back, the whole spinal cord is charged, and the flow, when it travels up and down, recharges the entire spinal cord, which is actually the highway that connects many other parts of our our body. And when you practice this properly in the second stage, you see that your body becomes more stronger. And when you are not well, you practice this, you see the body becomes heals, recovers faster. And I spoke about the third stage where Swamiji, uses the gaze to transmit that wisdom and the electromagnetic field to the disciple, but he also raises it to the top eye. And that has got profound impact. It gives you a blissful and kind of a universal state of experience. And I spoke about this. So all this while, everything has been documented in the book, Mahan's. If you refer to the I God book, it is there. He talks about the experience. I wanted to push it a little bit further. Why is this experience happening? What is the mechanism of this experience? Right? It is happening. I can feel it. I can feel the swirling. I can feel the experiences. But why? What's the physiological? So that is what I was curious about. And that is what Swamiji says. Go and study science and you will know what I'm talking about, why it's happening. Right? And I explained that in the previous sections when we covered the third stage. The gaze, the touch, and so on, the kind of practice that he taught us, why those things were happening. And I also showed that where the 12 parts of the brains are now re-energized to recalibrate, the neural connectivity is much better, the growth of the brain cells is much more faster. We have, as we age, our, brain cells die if you don't use it, like any other muscles. But when you practice meditation, when you practice introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and service, a random kindness, you see that that's changes that actually, reduces the decline of the brain cells, but actually creates something called neurogenesis, which is actually cell growth in the brain. So when you practice meditation, you see that your brain becomes healthy, your mind, so the hardware is the brain, mind is the software, the intellect is another software that's part of the brain. All that starts operating efficiently. I spoke about this earlier. So I want to talk, I left you last week of by practicing this Mahan's teachings, this meditation, I talked about the 12 structural changes in the brain and how it, helps us with happiness, helps us with the health of the body, the mind, the intellect. But I want to zoom down into 10 wealth that we acquire through this practice. Not just material wealth, this wealth that nature's embedded in us, the treasure that nature has embedded in us. So I want to take you through how these Mahan's teachings, this meditation specifically, creates that structural changes in us that helps us to connect and become one with nature, which has got tremendous potential, the infinite possibility and potential. When we are connected to it, we actually acquire the glimpses of that. The downloaders, how the Guru downloads his knowledge, his wisdom knowledge. The Guru actually teaches in that stage 1, 2, and 3. He teaches us through him connected to the universal, substratum where you have infinite possibilities and potentiality. So the Guru teaches you to connect to that infinite source that you are connected already, but we have lost it over the many, many millenniums, over becoming very material, but we lose that spiritual connection, that universal connection. So the Guru, through this practice, actually teaches you how to log on back to that universal connection. It's like coming to your house and you have an internet and your device is a new device. The device doesn't know how to connect to the internet, so you have to put in your password, right? Whatever device, your mobile phone or your laptop or your whatever. So the moment you put in your password, it connects. But the next time when you come to your house, when you go somewhere, you connect to your internet, your office, when you come to your house, your device actually recognizes your internet and it enables you to power back up because the password is already there. So think of it in that way, that this Mahan's meditation method is the 3 stages of the password for you to connect to that universal substratum. The Guru channels that for you to log on. He teaches you through him how to log on to this practice. And this is what the greatness is. And when you log on, there are 10 transformation that takes place in all of us. Of course, I talked about the physiological micro level transformation that happens where our hardware, our brain, and the body is recalibrated. But something very interesting happens to the mind and intellect. There's a transformation that happens, and that's what I want to talk about in the next few lectures. Right? So I want to talk about there's 10, but I want to talk about one today on how this happens. And I'm going to show you that though the Mahan has taught us this, though he had that subjective experience that he spoke about in his I God book, I had had the glimpses of those experiences over the many, many years and become more and more profound. And I wanted to know, has anybody else experienced this? Or is it just a subjective experience? Mahan's experienced it. Many people who practice Mahan's teachings experience this. But as a scientist, that's not good enough for me. I want to know, has this kind of analysis being done in a laboratory, in a scientific place that can validate whether the experiences that we are getting is real? And I'm going to show you some of the evidence that we think we are the only one practicing. There are many people that are practicing. Among them are scientists, and among them are scholars that actually put this practice under the microscope to really scrutinize what the impacts are. And I'm going to show you. So what then I feel more validated in the sense that, oh, I'm practicing this, I can feel the changes. And now there's scientific evidence to show actually there is a real transformation that happens in all of us. So I want to share with you some of that experience. So what is the spiritual compass? I'm going to talk about the spiritual compass because the spiritual connectedness is that helps our uncalibrated compass, which is our mind, to now recalibrate back to the spirit in us. So our material compass now becomes a spiritual compass through this practice of the first stage, second stage, and particularly the third stage where Swamiji, Guru Mahan, downloads the software for us to connect to that divine spirit that is permeating this universe that is embedded in us. So he's shown us the password. But most people lose the password, right? So when we harness the password, we use it every day, you see that our device or the body and the brain recalibrates that. So I call this the spiritual compass. You know, we have compass that shows us the direction. This shows us to the direction of our spirit. And you need that password. The password is the 3 stages of the initiation process. So I want to take you through that. So let me repeat this again, that Mahan's meditation technique teaches us how to harness, how that password for us to connect to that spirit that is embedded in us, that nature is part of nature, and that information has tremendous potential, far greater than our material biology. So this is what this great Mahan has shown. So what does it do? This is something very interesting. If you really practice this very well, in the early stage, you see that it's very difficult to calibrate. But if you do it intensively, suddenly you see that all your thoughts that are going everywhere starts recalibrating to that unarvu, or the life force. And that's specific to the techniques that he has shown. Many people have all kinds of other ways of doing it, but this Mahan's technique is so unique that you don't even have to say anything, think about anything, but just focus on that life force. And this is the beauty of his meditation technique. He shows how to anchor the mind, the thoughts, all the thoughts, anchor it onto the life force to create that optional thought, the thought other than all your material thought. And that brings in something, that anchoring, that password now that we download helps us to connect to that inner vibration. Before the password, the mind cannot get there. The mind is so caught up with all these material things, it cannot touch that. That's why Swamiji says, Yetada tatparate yetti yetti. He says, that abode that I cannot achieve, By effort, I was able to unlock that secret, to get that password, to be able to lock onto this. And he has shown us that password, right? So in this context, it helps to reduce that noise. In the beginning, you'll still run away, but the technique, if you practice intensively, you see that the mind becomes starting to lock on to that life force. Something very interesting happens. The noise that is there becomes more quieter. The mind starts uncovering a beautiful state of stillness. No thoughts at all, no material thoughts at all. And that moment, as though மெய் மறந்து ஒரு நிலை, you come to a state where you become transcendental to space and time, the space and time continuum that affects our biology and our material mind. That moment of glimpses of that, when we truly log on to that password or the initiation method, when you truly acquire it, you see that you attain this quietude or the stillness that gives you glimpses of that transcendental. You sometimes don't feel your body. Time just disappears and you see suddenly half an hour gone. Or sometimes as you're practicing longer, it just, you don't experience that material world. You just decouple yourself from that. So this is the kind of logging on to that inner vibration. Very interestingly, in this state, we actually, ordinary human beings, forgot this. They think their identity is their material identity. I am who, I'm so and so, material things, all those things. We have lost our true identity. And you see that when the mind becomes so quiet, initially, sometimes you get a little bit frightened. Hey, what is this state? But as you prolong, as you have that understanding, you get this wonderful state of, kind of a blissful state. In some of the Buddhist literature, they talk about the nirvana state, right? And that wonderful state, and you realize actually that is our original state. And you think a little bit more deeper, that is the state that we go to sleep. That is the state that we're in deep meditation. That is the state that is still prevalent, even though our material mind is still functioning. So you start getting that glimpses of that original state. This is what we call samadhi state. Samadhi means sama adi. That means you're going back to the original adi state, the original state. Is this what self is? You start asking, I'm experiencing something that is devoid of my material identity. So you start asking, is this what the self is that everybody talks about? Yennul nan arindhen, that part he says, is this what I am experiencing? You start listening to Swamiji's teachings, reading his book. I have got this glimpse. Is this what self is? You still have not confirmed it, but you say, is this what it is? And then suddenly something very interesting, when you come out of the meditation, you still have that doubt, right? The mind is still not mature enough, right? You start seeing nature in a different way. Before, you have a lot of trees in your garden. Suddenly the trees look more greener. Before, the trees were swaying in the wind. Now you can feel that sway. You start experiencing the nature around you in a more profound way. Before, you're just driving from A to B, but now you see, as you're driving, the trees are swaying. You see the buildings much more better. So what's happened here is that the mind that was noisy was missing all these amazing things. But when the mind becomes more quiet and more focused, the mind is able to experience nature and the environment around you in a more profound way. The mind is becoming more and more refined. When the mind becomes more and more refined, your senses over time period becomes more and more refined. And the vibrations that you missed out with a gross mind, now you can experience it much more better. Ants have been running in a house, but you observe now the ants come and meet, and then they move on, meet, and they move on. And you wonder, hey, why are they meeting? And you go a little bit more searching. Actually, that's their way of connecting. That's their internet, connecting each other. So you start connecting to the things around you, the trees, the plants, the insects, right? Wonderful things, right? So you're starting to see the mind is starting to become more and more subtle. Suddenly something very interesting, you ask questions. Hey, I'm seeing all this. Where is this seeing taking place? So the mind is probing deeper. Who is the seer? What is the seeing process? What am I seeing? Is it real or unreal? An ordinary gross mind would not ask this. It only get caught up in the scene and the experience, but it doesn't ask you, what am I seeing? What am I experiencing? So you're now questioning the whole material identity in the context of this spiritual lens, right? Hey, I am seeing. Where is the seeing taking place in me? What is the seeing process? What am I seeing? And this is the part that the science is really important. When I started thinking in this way, I said, okay, I am seeing an object. What am I seeing? I went back to the physics and started looking at it very carefully. The light radiation is hitting my eyes. You know, there's a process of electrical signals that is sent to the mind. So yes, all this is no problem. But what happens in the mind? Somebody's interpreting that signal. Who is that? Right? And you start asking a more profound question. You're not just seeing, but you're asking about the seeing process, what you're seeing, and who is making that seeing, making that understanding, that awareness. This is the probe now that you're starting to. So this step by step, you're unraveling this. This is where this practice, introspection, contemplation, reflection really makes the thing deeper. As Mahan said, Utru, Utru, Noka, Noka, Iparamum, Apparamum, Yega Paraparamum, Ennol Nanarinde. That in depth, that using the scientific lens, when you go deeper, you start seeing that the seer, the seeing process, the scene, the scenery, all are the same thing. Everything is happening in the same substrate. And you start when you start thinking about it very carefully, you say, oh my God, the seeing is happening inside me. The scene is also happening inside me. The scenery is also inside me. If the inside is not there, nothing will be seen. The seeing process is not there. So it all starts with us. The epicenter of our consciousness and the world we see starts with us. That's self-realization. The mind starts understanding this. But it takes a systematic and scientific approach to explore this. Meditation alone is not enough. Swamiji, that's why he wrote the I God book. Otherwise, he would just written a simple technique of meditating and everything is there. No, he started off this in a very scientific way, and the meditation is devoted to the later part of the chapters. Right? He didn't start it off first. He talked about that mindset first before going into the meditation. So suddenly you see that when you have this kind of questioning, you start discovering, hey, there is inside me, there is an illuminator, there is a compass, whatever you call it, a roh or atma, or whatever you call it, a Mahan calls it the I. That is what's driving everything. There is a charioteer in us that is giving us direction, giving us instruction, giving us the, awareness, the illumination, analysis, everything. And you start hey, this charioteer or this thing is the spiritual compass that Swamiji talked about. It leads us to the spiritual connectedness, but that requires a mindset that is profound, really introspecting in depth to discover that within us there is this illuminator, right? And very interestingly, that you start seeing, when we discover that, the foundation that shapes our life values. Before, all our life values are about material things, your titles, your position, your money, your name, whatever it is they give. That's all material that shapes our life. But now the values that shape you is something far different. It's much more transcendental to our biology. And this way, he says, I am that, right? So the foundation that shapes our life values starts shifting from the material identity to that spiritual identity. When you start feeling more universal, you see that your own demeanor changes, your own personality, which is material, cranky, all those things starts becoming more gentler, more accommodating, more agile. You see that shift starts taking place, right? And you will experience it first. When you start experiencing, you start saying, oh my God, this is fantastic. I feel much more happier, much more peaceful, you know. And when we do that, you see people around us, whether your spouse or your children, your friends, start saying, hey, a complete transformation that is happening, and they want to be around you. They feel so positive. So it's a shift that you make, you experience first, and it reverberates throughout your life. This is what the spiritual connectedness that Swamiji is talking about, right? That spiritual compass that we discover. And we lead a healthy lifestyle, mentally we are fit, spiritually we are very fit, intellectually we are very fit, nothing can shake us, everything that we get, everything that we experience, we ask questions, we explore. The sermons that we listen, we think about it very carefully and we decipher it with a very sharp lens, right? With a very introspective lens, never take anything for granted, right? So our body becomes more healthier, our whole mind, body, and our chemistry, the body chemistry starts changing. And you see that you feel more happier, more peaceful, you can sleep peacefully, you wake up, you feel more alert. This is what the spiritual connectivity that Swamiji is talking about. When you're connected, remember he gave you the password. Before the password, you're meandering, you're getting tired, you're complaining, this, that. The moment you connect using this password, you start experiencing a more profound, infinite possibilities and potentiality. You don't get tired. Sometimes you're working 12, 15 hours, right? You still don't feel tired. But the moment you come back home, have your shower, and you put your head, you go to bed very fast and you wake up. So that password that he has given us helps us to connect to that universal force that is embedded in our DNA. This is the wonderful part of that spiritual connective. So the compass now is no more the material compass, becomes a spiritual compass that guides us. This is what the spiritual compass does. And I want to define what that spiritual compass means, because it's the values and the mindset that we have. Very interestingly, that this is what shapes our lives. It's no more about watching the internet and all these things and trying to get, you say, okay, I've got this idea, I want to explore this. So what you do, the mind starts, as I said in my previous satsang, you become a lover of knowledge, right? You don't take things for granted. You put in a lot of effort and research to understand what you are learning and how it expands our intellect and our mind. So we try to understand God, the concept of God. We look at all the religious pursuit. We don't criticize it. We try to understand it. We try to understand the rationale for it. Bhakti, what is bhakti? Why bhakti is really important? If you see in the part where I cover on dualism, is Mahan's chapter in the YouTube clip, I speak about how the bhakti, which is the acharas, should transition to vichara, which is introspection, contemplation, reflection, and how that helps us to acquire the grace and the path to enlightened living. So we see that we then start looking at all the scriptures that we learned or memorized before. We start looking at it with a different lens, right? So we understand the concept of God. We then go deeper into, okay, how does this God realization lead to self-realization? So now you're transitioning from the bhakti religious to the spiritual pursuit. Because if you did bhakti really well, the acharas will lead you to the vichara, right? And that is where the exploration of self-realization, the pursuit of that, the experiential aspect of that God realization state, which has been very ritualistic, now is internalized and becomes an experiential, pursuit. So this dual thing becomes one. The dualism becomes one, But what you see is that over the period, as I said earlier, that spiritual connectedness opens up the kind of all the pathways. Now you see that your mind is no more taking things for granted. It pursues it in a very rational way, because the mind and intellect has the capacity and the capability to introspect, analyze, make sense of all the information that is coming in. And more importantly, remember I covered the nape eye where all our memories are stored. It's taught like a library for us. As we experience, it's taught those things. And interesting thing is that the library over time not only accumulates all the experience and knowledge, but the boundaries are porous. So times when you think very deeply, it interconnects the bits and bytes of knowledge to give you a fusion of knowledge that gives you better insights into God, the creator, the creative process, the creation, including our own self. So you see that the meditation that Mahan taught us gives us that awareness, that blissful quietude feeling, and that memory strength. All of them now come together to give us that tools of analysis, rationality based on logic and reason. You know, if you don't have this, it is very hard for people to do this. And you start pursuing the truth in two ways. One is the rational and the scientific pursuit. Logically, systematically, you are deciphering things based on experience. You say, okay, I have to experience this world. What is the practice of meditation, the peace, and how do I experience that in my day-to-day life? Am I getting peace? Why am I not getting peace? When I come to the subway or when I read Mahan's book, I feel peaceful, but I go to the office, it's not peaceful. So you start using a logical, rational, and scientific approach to understand our own self and our own personality. That's what the spiritual compass does. The spiritual compass guides from within. And when we are guided from within, whatever we do externally is guided with a spiritual lens. And life, that's what shapes our values. That's what the spiritual connectedness that Mahan is speaking about. Now, when I looked at this very, very carefully, I said, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Logically, it makes a lot of sense for me, you know, coming from a scientific background. Okay, it for me, one observation, I experienced it, maybe Mahan's one observation. I talked to a few people, they have similar. So a few observations. Is that good enough? I said, not really, though. I want to see if there's others that have experienced this. And this is where I started looking at the literature and say, hey, this meditation has been there for thousands of years. Has anybody else tried this? As a scientist, I am experiencing it, but we need to validate that with better data and better information. And this started a different journey. And that journey was reminded by Mahan. He says, practice this, study science, and it'll lead you to a particular place and abode, journey of understanding. And this is what over the many years I've been exploring, not just, practicing this meditation by initiating people to this practice, but I wanted to explain to them what this practice is, how this practice is making that transformation in us, in our personality. And I need to be able to explain that to them. Otherwise, it's just another shrouded with mystery. So I started looking at this very, very carefully. And in that research, I talk about spiritual connectedness, spiritual capital. I saw a PhD thesis that someone actually did a PhD on Kundalini Yoga. And they show actually through data and so on that people who practice Kundalini Yoga actually build spiritual capital. And that helps them they looked at teenagers and helped them with stress, emotional stability, resilience of the mind. The mind becomes more stronger. They had empirical data. They interviewed and they studied hundreds of kids that are practicing this. So students go through stress, and they say that spiritual capital helps them to manage their stress very well. It regulates the emotions. And this they studied among the poor. They studied among those who are vulnerable that may end up in high risk of crimes and so on. It builds resilience in them. And it teaches them how to integrate the body, mind, and the spirit so that spiritual values percolates in their mind and the intellect so that they start seeing better value, live a more value based. You can download the study and read the study. This is done for a doctor of education thesis. It empowered the students because they have now the spiritual capital, which is far, far greater than that material capital. And I'll show you how that spiritual capital is so important to generate everything else. So in my research, this thesis was done in 2012, and I thought this is fantastic. Now we have evidence to show that Kundalini meditation actually, builds that spiritual capital. Here are the more important peer-reviewed journals that actually show that actually mindfulness and the connectivity, that means the meditation actually helps us to be connected to nature better. People who practice meditation tells, actually, I feel more nature-centric. I feel one with everything, right? And the first study actually shows us there's a whole series of studies that actually, these are scientists that actually put to practice and say, hey, something here. The same question that I had 40 years ago, 45 years ago. I'm experiencing something. Something is changing in me, but I don't have enough data and evidence to share that this has got a significant effect. Right? Maybe one observation myself, but are there others that have done it? Yes, maybe Mahan has done it, but what about others? Right? So that journey reminded me of Swami saying, hey, practice this, but go and do the scientific work. More studies, in 2018, 2019, there are more studies that actually show that mindfulness is meditation, and that kindness through meditation also gives you that connectedness to humanity, to people, and nature itself. So you become more people person. I spoke about the winsome personality, right? And there's a structural change that is happening in our brain, in our mind, in our personality. And you get that oneness, that connected state. Ennul nan arinde, Mahan, beautifully like the eureka moment for him. You know, I had my own eureka moment, but I could not validate it, right? And now, I experienced it, but I want to know, are there others experience? And true enough, there is enough literature that tells us that this has got profound impact on all of us. Right? So I am convinced now that the three stages of meditation that Swamiji has taught has got a direct impact on the quality of our life, our personality, and help us lead an enlightened. That's what the spiritual compass that I want to talk about today. Sandosham.